Good morning, everyone. Hello. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Melisa Danho, and I'm a program manager and interim dietetic internship director at the UT Health Houston School of Public Health. Today's webinar is hosted by the Michael and Susan Dell Center for Healthy Living at the UT Health Houston School of Public Health in Austin. The center's vision is healthy children in a healthy world. Before we get started, I just want to make some housekeeping announcements. This webinar is being recorded and will be archived along with the presentation slides on our website at msdcenter.org. If you have any questions during the presentation, please enter them into your questions chat box. We will have time for a Q&A at the end of the presentation. So I'm excited to introduce our speakers today. From the Nourish program at the Michael and Susan Dell Center for Healthy Living at the UT Health Houston School of Public Health, we have Diana Guevara and Dolores Woods. Diana Guevara is a community health education specialist with the Nourish program. Diana's interest for nutrition bloomed upon learning the power that food and nutrition can have in preventing disease. Her passion for helping others adopt a healthy lifestyle in an easy and delicious way led her to become our community health education specialist. She's one of our own, and Diana graduated as a UT Health dietetic intern from the UT Dietetic Internship Program. She has a master's in public health and is a registered dietitian. She's worked in Florida and Houston in both wellness and clinical dietetics. Dolores Woods is a nutritionist supervisor for the Nourish program. After completing her undergraduate education at UC Riverside, Ms. Woods moved to NYC to attend the culinary school and received a Grand Diplôme in culinary arts from the French Culinary Institute. She's worked in the restaurant industry and taught cooking classes for several years. Her interests are food, cooking, and sustainability, which led her to complete a master's degree in food studies from NYU. Dolores is a chef and registered dietitian and has worked in the field of culinary arts, nutrition, education, and university food service. I will now hand it over to Diana and Dolores to start their presentation on no waste cooking. Take it over.
Alrighty, good morning. So I am Diana. I will start us off with a little bit of background information and our presentation, and then I'll hand it on to Dolores, who will show us some delicious recipes using all parts of the vegetables. So it's going to be a really fun morning. Thank you guys for joining us. And if y'all have questions, of course, you can add them in the chat and we will address them later. So we'll go ahead and get started. Our objectives for today's webinar is to learn how to choose foods that protect the environment. So it is National Nutrition Month. It's our last month of Fuel for the Future. So really thinking about our environment, helping protect our planet so that we can have a long planetary health. How to choose sustainable seafood. So that's one of the big topics that we kind of think about when we think about sustainability and choosing our foods. Minimizing food waste at home. So what can you do today or this week or this weekend to help minimize our food waste? And then some cooking techniques to help you utilize all of your vegetables, all parts of your vegetables. So that'll be our cooking demo at the end of the hour. So a little background on food waste. The USDA estimates 133 billion pounds of food is wasted in a year, which is a cost of $161 billion. In a little bit more manageable terms, that's 40%, according to Feeding America, 40% of food in the US is actually wasted. So really, really sad numbers here. And how does this affect us? Well, we know that there are people who are going hungry. So there's this abundance of food that is being wasted. It takes a lot of resources to create our food, to grow it, to farm it, to do whatever it is that we need to do to create our food. Then more resources are used in transporting that food. And then it gets to our grocery stores or our homes and it gets wasted. And then it goes to the landfill. So that's another waste of resources, is just the space on our earth. So really a huge problem and a lot of different steps. So when we think about it, it can be a little overwhelming, but let's just bring it back to, what can we do as consumers and as people who eat? So talking about seafood specifically, the UN estimates 3 billion people rely on seafood as an essential component in their nutrition, which makes sense. Seafood is very healthy and brings a lot of nutrients to our lives. 179 million tons of seafood is harvested in a year, and it employs 60 million people. So it is a huge industry. Seafood comes from both wild and farmed. A lot of what we're eating right now, about over 50%, is actually farmed seafood. So we've transitioned from that wild caught to farmed in an attempt to actually correct our problems that we've had. So we'll talk about that in a second. But these numbers are increasing. Our population is growing. So let's talk about the issue with seafood. So meeting these demands does come at a cost. So we did have an issue of overfishing, so taking too many fish out of the waters, and then they can't reproduce, so then we can't have any more fish. Poor resource management, again, with our oceans and everything else that goes into actually fishing or farming. And then our changing climate. So fish that needed cold water to live in are now not having that cold water. Our waters are warming up, so they're not able to survive as well in those waters. And then our consumption habits. So, certain fish might be a little bit more popular, so they're more in demand. And certain things like that are some obstacles that can lead to a decrease in our wild fish populations, and then threaten our economic survival and our food security. So if we kind of end the population of a certain type of fish, then we won't have that fish in the future, which is really sad in a lot of ways. So fish farming or aquaculture has been introduced to kind of help with this crisis. However, it's not always farmed responsibly. So the way these farms are created, they're in the ocean and water flows in and out. So there's a pollution situation. There's concern for a lot of irresponsible practices. And again, it can be damaging to the environment because we are kind of polluting the water that our fish, our wild fish, are actually living in as well. So some solutions. Thinking about sustainable seafood. So how can we help as consumers? Sustainable seafood is seafood that is fished or farmed to protect our wildlife and our environment. So in accordance to human rights and labor conditions. So we are lucky in the US that we are very regulated in the way that fish are fished or farmed. So really looking at what options are best for us and for the environment. So the role of our consumer is to really encourage businesses to source and sell sustainable options. So the only thing we can do is really ask for those things, make it known at restaurants and grocery stores, et cetera, that we do care about the sustainability of where that fish came from, and we are asking for those different types of sources. Knowing what to buy and shifting that marketplace. So demand kind of, if you think about supply and demand will affect our supply. So if we demand more sustainably caught fish, then we can hopefully shift that marketplace towards more sustainable. And becoming familiar with the Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch or any other seafood watch, the NOAA also has a seafood watch, and we'll show you that right now. So some recommendations, the Monterey Bay Seafood Watch specifically, they kind of break it down into best choice, good alternatives, and avoid. So seafood in general is a really big topic, and the best choices and alternatives and whatnot, it'll depend also on seasonality. So when would it be a good time to fish a certain type of fish versus when would it be a good time to kind of let them reproduce and continue on their population. So they have consumer guides actually online that are super easy to utilize. So if you go to the Monterey Bay Watch website, so it's actually this seafoodwatch.org, you can go to the recommendations tab, search recommendations if you're looking for a certain type of fish. What type of fish should I be getting? Let's say you are shopping for salmon, it'll tell you try to buy this type, try to avoid this type. If you don't want to do a deep dive on all of these different types of foods, typically what experts are recommending is your fin fish. So things like salmon, tuna, mackerel, any of those fish that have fins. Really, we're looking for those wild caught, specifically domestic. Ideally, if you can, go local. If you are buying those shellfish, so things like clams, even crawfish or lobster, oysters, they've been doing a lot of great aquaculture farming practices that actually clean our waters. So you can actually go for farmed options of those types of fish as well. So that's kind of that general guide, but if you want to go really specific on what type and from where, etc., you can check out these buying guides. And they even have a little pocket guide that you can print out or download to your phone and take a look at whenever you're at the grocery store or the farmer's market or wherever. So kind of shifting from seafood to regular food, so produce, fruits and vegetables, our favorite topic. Talking about how can we be a little bit more sustainable there. So one option that is really fun for us is to grow your own produce. So you don't have to have a whole plot of land or a bunch of space. You can actually do this in container gardens or herbs or vegetables on your window sills. So here we have some little seedlings that are actually from our garden. We have a little, I believe this is pepper and tomato seedlings. So you can put these in, a decent sized little container, keep it outside, keep it watered, take care of it, and then you'll have your own very, very local vegetables here. And I have our cookbook up here because we have some recommendations on how to grow your own fruits and vegetables here. So each recipe, the highlighted vegetable will tell you a little tidbit on how to harvest, how to grow it, how to produce it. So if you don't have your cookbook and you're interested in it, that can be a great option as well. And then if you don't have access to sunlight, and my apartment is very dark, I can't really grow that much, looking at farmers market. So supporting your local farmers market. Those small farmers generally are using really sustainable practices. They're usually going to be, organic and protecting the environment around them because that soil is their livelihood. So that's a great option. And then you're also reducing those food miles. So if you're buying from a small farmer who lives, 5-10 miles away versus buying an avocado from Mexico that has to be, shipped and has to travel a whole bunch of miles to get to us, you're reducing that carbon footprint on how long that has to travel. And another option is a community-supported agriculture or a CSA or crop sharing system. So I know if you're local to the Houston area, there is a Planet Forward crop sharing system where basically what you do is you're supporting that farm, you're supporting a share of that farm, and it's usually weekly or biweekly, depending on your CSA. They'll give you a produce box of what they've harvested that week. So it can be really fun because you get different things that maybe you weren't expecting or you haven't tried before, and you're getting very, very fresh and local produce, which is also really exciting. You're supporting those local farmers who, again, care a lot about the earth and how they're practicing their farming. So that's another great option in terms of eating local. Another option, if you don't have access to farmers markets or a CSA box or a lot of sunlight and space, is just looking for seasonal produce. So if you are at the grocery store, you're looking for what is seasonal, and seasonal basically means what's in season in our area. So it's purchased and consumed around the time that it was harvested. The benefits of this are huge. So one of them, it has to travel shorter distance, so you're reducing those food miles, that carbon footprint, because you're creating less pollution of just having to transport. Again, right now it's spring, summertime. If you wanted a winter vegetable, it would have to come from somewhere where it's currently cold and it was harvested. So it was harvested a long time ago and needs to travel all the way here to your grocery store and be unloaded and all of that. So you're just reducing a lot of pollution and food miles in that way. But also, since it doesn't have to travel as far, it's going to be fresher, it's going to taste better, it's going to be able to be picked at a shorter distance to ripeness, so it's going to usually taste a lot better. And it'll be less expensive. So it's usually the produce that's on sale that is seasonal because we've got an abundance of it. We've actually harvested a lot of it, so it's available and we can eat it. So another consideration that you can do just if you're shopping at your regular grocery store. So minimizing food waste, we talked about how much food waste there is in the US, and it is quite a lot. So some tips to actually minimize that food waste. Biggest tip is to take inventory of what you already have. A lot of times we just roam into the grocery store and we roam around and see what looks good. Oh, this looks pretty, this is on sale, etc. And we don't really think about what we already have. So maybe we bought double of things. Maybe we thought we were out of eggs and now we have a whole bunch of eggs, or we thought we had something and then we don't. So really taking a look at what's in your pantry, what's in your freezer, what's in your fridge, trying to utilize the things that you have so it doesn't end up getting old or going bad, or etc. Again, avoid excess purchases. So being realistic on how much you're actually able to eat or how much you're going to be able to eat of that specific food. Maybe if something is on sale and you really want to get a decent amount of it, think strategically. So if you want to get double or triple or whatever, just think, okay, let's go ahead and freeze this so it'll last longer. So thinking about not just letting it sit in your fridge until it goes bad and you have to throw it away. And then planning meals around ingredients that you already have. So if you look in your fridge and you say, oh, maybe I have this, like I personally have a beet in my fridge that I need to use. So if I weren't to look in my fridge, I would just go to the grocery store. Maybe I would buy a completely different meal idea that didn't include beets, and then that one beet would go bad. So just looking at what you have and seeing, oh, I've had this for a while, let's go ahead and use it. And that way you're also saving money when you go to the grocery store. Inflation right now is very real. So if you look at what you have and make your meals around what you already have in your pantry or your fridge or your freezer, then you're only picking up a couple of things to complement what you've already got. You're utilizing the food that you've got in storage and you're saving money. So it's a win-win-win for everyone. Tip number 2 is about purchasing and storing your produce. So again, looking for those in-season, healthy-looking produce. A lot of times, especially I've seen with berries, a lot of berries, if you look at the bottom of the package, some of them will already be kind of mushy and moldy at the grocery store. So if you bring that to your home, they're only going to last 1 or 2 days. And I've had patients and people tell me, you know, I buy this and then it just goes bad. So really looking for that produce that looks plump and fresh and tasty, and it looks like it's going to last you until you need to eat it. In season is going to be great as well because, again, it's going to be fresher. It didn't have to travel a bunch of miles to get to you. Another huge tip is making sure your fridge is clean. So a lot of times, especially when we're talking about fresh produce or even things that are protein like cheeses and breads and whatnot, what we're looking at is mold that grows, and mold can only grow if it exists either on the food or in your fridge. So really making sure that your fridge is nice and clear, there's a lot of airflow. So if you can, maybe weekly or every 2 weeks or so often, just taking everything out, cleaning it out, that's going to be a great way to take that inventory and say, oh, the back of my fridge actually had this one item that I need to use. So it can be helpful in a lot of ways. But making sure you just do a quick little wipe down of your fridge every so often will be really, really helpful in helping that produce last longer. Another thing is storing it where you're going to see it. So a lot of times when we buy our fruits or vegetables, maybe we use those drawers, and then they go in the drawers, and then they're never to be seen again until you start smelling something and you're wondering what you're smelling, and it's actually those fruits or vegetables that went bad. So if you know that this is you and you're someone that doesn't look at your drawers, maybe considering putting those fruits and vegetables out on display. So on those shelves that are going to be at eye level, so when you open that fridge, you can say, oh yes, I have fresh berries, or yes, I have some spinach that I need to use. And it'll just be that little trigger that says, oh, I do have this, and then maybe you'll be more likely to eat it. With certain produce, sometimes it's better to have it in the fridge. Sometimes it's better to have it out on the counter. And then Dolores will actually talk about some of the tools that we use to store our produce. So a lot of times I just Google, best way to store tomatoes. Oh, it's on the counter. Best way to store this. Oh, it's should be in a dark, cold area. So Google is your best friend on this as well. And tip number 3 is getting creative with your leftovers. So I love my freezer. I freeze most things. I live alone. So if I make extra of something, it's going to be a really great way to kind of prep your little lunch for another time, put it in your freezer. And then when you've had a really busy week, you can just pull that out and then you'll have a meal ready to go and you didn't have to cook. So it locks in that freshness, that flavor, nutrients, and it prevents you from letting it sit in the fridge for too long and then getting kind of icky thinking about eating it. Another great way to use not necessarily leftovers, but things that are kind of left over while you're cooking is your kitchen scraps. So if you are cooking with some fruits and vegetables, you can actually make your own stock. So vegetable stock or vegetable broth with those little scraps. So if you're, cutting up onions, you can save those peels, you can save the little ends of the carrots, those things that maybe you don't want to eat because it's that little root part that maybe you just want to get rid of. You don't necessarily want to eat it, but it still has a lot of that flavor that you'll get from the vegetables. So if you save it, and if you don't use vegetables that often, you can keep this in your freezer. And then once you have enough to make your stock, so about a pound of vegetable scraps, you can actually just put it in a pot with some water, maybe add some herbs, some peppers, a little bit of salt, and you can let that simmer for a while until it catches some color, some flavor, and you've got your own homemade stock that you didn't have to buy, and you're repurposing those little scraps that you would have just thrown away or hopefully composted. So great ways to kind of get creative with leftovers. Also, if you are going to use the leftovers maybe the next day, but you don't want to eat the same thing, creating different meals with it. So I love bowls because you can kind of mix and match and add different flavors to make it a more exciting, fresh, different meal. But another way that you can do it is doing things like stir fries. So if you have a leftover, let's say roasted vegetable, you can maybe the next day do a stir fry, or you can even do, I love for brunch reheating those little vegetables and then maybe adding a couple of eggs, cracking them on top, and then you have kind of like a hash. So just getting really creative with those leftover foods that you might have not eaten if you weren't excited to eat them. And tip number 4 is donate. So any extra food that you have, maybe this happens to me a lot, you went to Costco and you saw something that looked delicious and you bought a huge packet of it, and you're not gonna be able to finish it before the expiration date or the best by date, or you're just not gonna finish it at all. Consider donating to your local food bank or pantry. A lot of churches have little pantries, so anywhere that it can go to someone who would really appreciate it and would like it, that can be a really great way to reduce that waste. And making sure just to check those expiration dates, especially on things like milk, meat, eggs, things like that. Just making sure that you're not giving someone something that might make them sick. But if it's close enough to that date and they'll probably use it right away, that's a great time to be able to give it out and help someone in need. All right, so we are going to go ahead and pass it over to Miss Dolores. We have some recipes. We have a carrot top pesto, a kale stem pesto, Swiss chard, stock and tahini dip, and pickled watermelon rinds. So we'll go ahead and pass it on to her to see some delicious food.
So much, Diana. And remember, y'all, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the lovely chat box. Also, as is in the chat, if you need any continuing education credits from the CDR, if you're a registered dietitian, This is, you can get a CPEU for attending this webinar. If you want to receive those credits, please send an email to nourish@uth.tmc.edu. All right, we'll pass it over to you, Chef Dolores.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. So I'm going to go over some quick recipes, but before that, Diana mentioned saving your scraps. So I wanted to show you this little baggie that I have in the freezer, and it's all my scraps. So I have some onion skins on here, garlic skins, the tops of some peppers. So this is really great just to have and keep putting it in here maybe once a week. You could keep it in the freezer and make your own stock. So especially the onion skins, these are actually going to have a lot of flavor. So don't throw it away. It's really a great way to make your own vegetable stock. The stocks are pretty expensive when you go to the store. So I'm going to have mine here and just put it back in the freezer when I'm done. But remember, if you want to compost, if you do have a way to compost at home, do that. If not, save these for some scraps. So the other thing I'm going to talk about is our carrot top pesto. This is the first thing I'm going to prepare. And I wanted to show you some of the carrots we have in our garden right now. These are really beautiful carrots that we just harvested this morning. And a lot of times when we get these either at the store or the farmer's market, we tend to cut the tops off and throw those away. But these are great. They're edible. You could put them in salads. You could use it as an alternative to parsley, or you could make it as a pesto, which is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to show you. But before that, anytime you have greens on a root vegetable, the best way to store them is to cut the greens off that root vegetable. So I would cut them off and store them separately. And the reason for that is because the greens are going to keep drawing moisture and nutrients away from the root. So whether it's a carrot, a turnip, or a beet, if you leave them like that, they're just, the actual vegetable is going to dry out. So you want to make sure to separate them when you store them in the refrigerator. So for this pesto, what I already have here in my blender are the tops of the carrots. And I just gave them a rough chop. You don't really have to do much because the blender is going to process everything. I have a handful of basil. And then I'm going to put 3 garlic cloves in here, some tomato paste, salt and pepper, and a little bit of water. The water is just going to help everything get thinned out, and it's going to help process it. Some acidity, so we're going to get that from some lemon. So I'm going to squeeze 1 lemon on here. I love these juicers. If you don't have one of these, this is just such a great tool. It makes everything really fast. So this is it for our pesto. Again, something really different, a different variation. Typically, our pesto is basil with pine nuts, but you can really add any types of greens. I'm also going to add some walnuts in here, and I'm going to process this first just to get it a little bit chopped up, not too much. And once we do that, then we're going to add the oil, drizzle it from the top, and add the cheese at the end. So while that's getting processed, I'm going to go ahead and go to the next recipe. So one of the things with the pestos, a lot of recipes you see will tell you to add the cheese along with the ingredients. I actually like to fold this in at the end. I think that it really adds a nice flavor to it. Otherwise, it gets a little bit lost. So I like to add this in at the end. So the next thing I'm going to do is talk a little bit about the Swiss chard. So we're making a Swiss chard dip. I have a salad spinner here, and a spinner is a great way to save, not only wash your vegetables, but save them also. You could store them in here. So the pesto that I'm going to make is with the stalks, but it's also with the leaves. So here I have some leaves that I washed. And I'm going to just spin this and store it. Now, when you store when you store any leaves in here, you could line it with some water. Sorry, the water's going to dry out. You're going to line your basket with some paper towels, and you could store this in the refrigerator. So I really like using the spinner not only to wash, but also to store. So we're going to go ahead and set this aside. Now, I'm going to just hand this oil over so that we can continue with the pesto. I have another little gadget here too. So this is another type of blender, but I already have some of the chard stalks in here. So with the chard, you could use the entire vegetable also. A lot of times people don't like using that thick stalk, but it's perfectly edible. Depending on the maturity of the pesto, of the chard, you know, if it's an older leaf, you're going to get a really thick stalk. If that's the case, what you could do is blanch it. So get some boiling water, put it in there a couple of minutes, and then take it out. You don't necessarily have to put it in an ice bath, but what you could do is just, you know, cook it a little bit so it softens the chard a little bit. So I chopped up the chard, and you can see that this is a really beautiful, it's the Bright Lights chard. So it's in different colors. It's the red veins, the orange veins, and some of the white ones. So it just looks really beautiful. And you can use, again, you can saute this. You could use this in salads. When you remove the stalks, it's great for something like this, like the pesto. I'm actually going to use some of this in the sauce itself. So I'm just going to roll it up. I'm going to stack my leaves up and do a rough chop just to give it a head start in our little blender. So just gonna chop this up, and we'll probably have to do this in batches. So I'm gonna put that in there. We have some tahini in here. So tahini is a sesame paste, and it adds a really great nuttiness. Most hummus is made with tahini paste. This is not really a hummus because there aren't any chickpeas in there. A hummus will typically have your chickpeas in there, but the tahini is going to give it a nice creaminess and that nutty flavor. I'm going to add some salt as well. And I just add about half a teaspoon. And then if we need more salt at the end, I can add more. And the juice of a lemon. So I really like adding acidity to a lot of these dishes just because it brings out the flavor. You have something that is just very fresh, and many times when you're eating you think, oh, I need something, and we tend to go to salt. We tend to think, well, let's put a little bit more salt, but a lot of times you need to add an acid, and that's what's going to round out the flavor and give you a little bit more of that freshness and really round it out. So this is going to go and it's going to get blended. It has the tahini, which is going to help with the, just getting it through. If it needs to maybe have a little bit more liquid, we could add some water to thin it out. So the pesto here. This is what our pesto looks like now. And so you can see how bright and green it is. And that's because of the carrot tops. So the carrot tops really add a brightness to it. Our basil itself, it oxidizes pretty fast, which means that it turns black right away. If you've ever chopped basil for a garnish or anything else, you can see that it starts getting to look a little bit wilted and black. But when you make a pesto and you add a different herb, whether it's carrot tops or even some parsley, that actually helps keep it a little bit more green. So our pesto is done, and now I'm going to fold in our cheese. So this is grated Parmesan cheese. And again, I just like doing this afterwards because you can get more of that cheesy flavor. Otherwise, depending on your blender, how powerful it is, it almost feels like it melts in. So adding it at the end is just a really great way to make your pesto. So I have this, and you could serve it with a some pasta. You could even serve it with roasted potatoes. So if you wanted to roast the actual potatoes and then put this on your on there as a dip or as a sauce, it's great with pasta. It's actually really great with fish too, if you wanted to put it on fish. So there are so many different choices for that. And again, using our carrot tops. So don't toss the carrot tops. You want to make sure you use the entire vegetable. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to start here is I'm just going to grab my recipe, my tray for my next ingredients. It's going to be our watermelon rind. Now, a lot of people don't know that you could eat the watermelon rind. So it's almost, I would say the closest thing I could describe it to is cucumber. So if you pickled cucumber, that's what it would taste like. And it's really great. So I made some yesterday and this is what it looks like. So you could keep it in the refrigerator. You could use it on like tacos if you wanted. I'm gonna actually use it on a salad, on a watermelon salad. So very different ways to use it, but again, you're using the entire, in this case, fruit. So one of the things that I already did is that I already peeled the watermelon. So I got all of the green peel off. And so you could see that now I just have the white part of it. So what I'm gonna do is just cut it in half. And there are different ways you could do this. So I have a jar already here that is ready. And I cut this into, I would say, pretty thick chunks. So these are a little bit more squares. Or you could cut it into ribbons. The one I did yesterday was more of a ribbon. So you can see here this type of ribbon. And I did that using a peeler. So it really depends on your preference, but different ways that you can do this. If you wanted to use ribbons, cut it into ribbons, I would recommend a Y peeler just because you have more control over it. So you could just start at the halfway and get some ribbons in here. Now, this is a seedless watermelon. It's a little bit small. It's not really watermelon season yet. We're starting to see some, but when we're in the middle of summer and you have all of those watermelon, you're gonna see that they're much thicker. And I would recommend that you do use this recipe, make this recipe with a thicker rind. You could see when I hold it up here, it's a little bit thin. There are some watermelon where it could be about ½ an inch. So you're gonna have more of a, I would say, crunchy end product if you use a watermelon that has a thicker rind. So you could, again, keep going with the peeler and just make sure that you're getting long strips and hopefully my peeler cooperates here. So you could do that, or what you could do is continue doing the chunks the way I did here. And so I'm gonna cut this in half again. And what I'm gonna do is cut it into cubes. When you're making a watermelon salad, you want to make sure that you have large cubes, about 1.5 to 2 inches. And the reason for that is because watermelon has so much water in it. If you cut it into small pieces, it's going to exude a lot of that water. So you're going to end up eating kind of like a dry piece of watermelon. So if you keep it pretty large, you'll be able to retain as much of that water as possible. So just going to keep that here. And then make sure you keep the rind. So let me clear this out. Keep that rind. And for something like this, it's a little bit odd shaped. So I'm just gonna cut it like that, get that pink flesh off. So for a lot of people, this is much easier than a peeler. Sometimes it just looks nicer, when it's those round ribbons. So from here, then what you wanna do is keep cutting these into pretty large pieces and putting them into a mason jar. So I'm just going to cut these and then continue cutting the chunks of the actual watermelon. So another thing with, you could flavor the rind any way you'd like. So this one has some sliced jalapenos, and there's some lime zest in there, just because it's a nice combination to have the spiciness with some of the sweet and sour that you're going to get from the brine. So the brine itself, you could use any kind of vinegar that you'd like. I used an apple cider vinegar, equal parts vinegar, water, some salt, and some sugar. You want to boil that and then let it cool down to room temperature. And so this is our liquid. And you just want to pour that over your jar and seal this. It'll be ready in a couple of hours, but preferably you want to leave it overnight just so that it really develops a lot of that flavor. But it's really that easy. And again, you can use the watermelon itself for a salad and then keep the rind so that you could use that for any type of garnish. So let me bring out my other cubed watermelon. So I have some already here that's been chilling. And I'm going to add the other chunks to that. So if you are making a fruit salad, whether it's watermelon, you could actually do this with honeydew as well, or anything else. You want to make sure that if you're going to dress it, you don't want to add oil. So the oil is just going to kind of slide off because there is so much water content in this. But I do want to bring out some of that flavor. So this is lime juice. So I'm just going to add a little bit of lime juice. Something that would be great in here would be some red onions, or you could use scallions also, just to, bring out get the flavors in here with some of that sweetness. So I am going to just toss this. And it looks like it needs a little bit more lime juice. Excuse me. So a little bit more lime juice. And now we could get some of that watermelon rind and put this on top and garnish our salad. So this is, really fresh, and when it's cold, it's a great snack for summer months. But you could also make it a little heartier, so you could add some cheese in here if you wanted to. A feta or a cotija would be great in here. And then maybe some pumpkin seeds also, so you could have really a nice side salad for a day of grilling. But there you go. So you could have watermelon salad with some watermelon rind. And we're just going to let our rind pickle for, I would really leave it overnight if you can. And the last thing I wanted to do was garnish that. So we have some cilantro here from our garden also. The cilantro, if you have any herbs, you could put them in a vase or even a mason jar with some water, and they're going to last on your countertop or even in the refrigerator. They will last in the refrigerator with some water. So that's a good way to store your herbs. With cilantro, it's one of the really only herbs that you could use the entire stem. I wouldn't use stems on herbs like parsley or even some of the woody ones like thyme, rosemary, because it is going to be woody. But with cilantro, you could use the entire stem. I know sometimes people tend to remove the seeds and then remove the leaves and then toss the stems. But for something like this, use the entire stem, and it's much more flavorful too. So I'm just gonna chop this up, and we're gonna sprinkle it on the salad as a garnish. So there you go. Again, a very nice combination, very fresh for the coming summer months. Does anyone have any questions so far? No? Okay, so I'm just going to clear my station here. And I do want to show you the Swiss chard pesto. So you can see it's a different type of green, but it's really smooth. And so this can be used as you would any other pesto, or even as a really a dipping sauce. So the tahini makes it really creamy. So it's a great consistency. If you haven't used tahini, it's something great to have in your pantry. It has a lot of different uses, so just adding it more flavor. Okay, so the last thing that we have here is a kale and parsley pesto. So we have, I think I misspoke. So this was our Swiss chard dip. It's not really a pesto. Now, one of the things that we did with the kale, so I want to show you, it looks, it's already chopped. I do have all of the stems in here that have been chopped small. So a lot of people, you know, either love or hate kale. You have some people who think that it's just, it's too chalky, or, you know, they just don't like it. And, you know, I sometimes tend to agree depending on the type of kale. So what I like to do is blanch it. And this is why it looks so green. It's a really nice, vibrant green because I blanched it. So I did get some water, some boiling water, and I put it in there for just about a minute. It doesn't need a lot of time. You don't want to leave it there so that it gets really mushy and then it starts falling apart. So 1 minute is enough. You take it out, put it in an ice bath to shock it and stop the cooking from going on. So then it's drained and I squeezed it dry. I don't want a lot of water in here because that's going to thin out the pesto too much and we're not going to get a thick, you know, creamy pesto. So I squeezed it dry, but I really would recommend if you're going to make some salads or with kale or anything like that, you could blanch it first and it kind of gets some of that fibrousness off of it, and it makes it a little bit more palatable, especially for those people who may not be real fans of the kale. So I'm going to put this in a food processor. So I have my kale here with the stems, and if you only have stems, that's also fine. This could work with just the stems, but you know, I had the actual leaf that I wasn't going to do anything with, so I'm just going to use the leaf in here as well. And then I have some parsley. So this is also from our garden. I'm just going to chop it a little bit. The stems are going to go in here because everything's going to get processed. So there's no reason to not have the parsley in there. It's going to add some, you know, a little bit of a different flavor. And again, that bright green color. And then I do have some walnuts, some salt and some red pepper flakes, some garlic. And one of the things I wanted to show you was the garlic. So my garlic here, it has a germ. So whenever you have garlic and you could see that green germ sprouting, a lot of people tend to throw out their garlic. And that's not always necessary. You can, you know, depending on how big it is, you could just remove that germ and keep using the garlic clove. If it's not too big, if you know you can't actually see it coming out of the clove, you could still use it in a recipe. There's really nothing wrong with it. It's still edible. If you're using, you know, maybe like 10 cloves for a certain recipe, it may be a little bit bitter. But if you're just using 1 or 2 cloves, the germ is perfectly fine. So you don't have to throw out your garlic cloves just because there's that green germ coming out. And then we're going to add some zest here. So I really love zest in a lot of dishes. If you want a really concentrated lemon flavor, the best way to do that is using a microwave and getting some of that zest in there. So just gonna get the zest of 1 lemon. And we're gonna process this for just a little bit. And once it's, you know, we don't necessarily want to paste, but once it's processed, we're gonna start the oil and get the oil in there streaming so that it gets creamy. And so that is our last item. So our kale pesto. Any questions so far before I show you the product, our final product?
Yeah, we do have a few questions from our participants. One person wants to know, besides in a salad, what are some other ways you can enjoy watermelon?
Right, so other ways to enjoy the watermelon salad, you mean?
Yeah, well, the watermelon rind is there. Can you use it in something beside a salad, or could you just snack on it by itself?
Oh yeah, you could use it for tacos. Really, anytime you're using maybe pickled onions, you could use it in tacos. You could actually use it in hot dogs instead of a sauerkraut, just because it has that similar consistency. So if you think about, like a pickled cucumber, a home pickled cucumber, not really something store-bought because they're very different. But you could use it for tacos. You could use it as even to brighten up maybe some like an omelet or some scrambled eggs. So really a lot of different uses.
Okay, we have a couple of questions about the kale. One person wants to know if a lot of nutrients are lost when you blanch any vegetable. And someone else asked if you could just kind of blanching.
Okay, so the blanching itself, you're not really going to lose that many because it's such a quick process. If you're boiling it for 20 minutes, 10-20 minutes, then yes, everything's going to leach out. But for 1 minute, you're not, you're still going to get a lot of that fiber in there. So it's still really great. And I think that for a lot of people who don't eat vegetables or kale, especially those dark leafy greens, if you could process it a different way, that really helps make up for the fact that they wouldn't eat it otherwise. And then sorry, your second question, can you repeat that?
Oh, could you massage the kale instead of blanching it to kind of break it down a little?
You could. A lot of times when you massage it, you need to use either salt or oil. So you could definitely do that. This way, since we're not using it really as a salad with a dressing, I didn't massage it. I thought, blanching is a little bit better for this specific recipe. But definitely, if you're making your own salad, you could massage it and break it down.
Okay, and then can you freeze the pesto or the dip?
Yeah, so you could freeze any of these, put them, in a really airtight container and freeze them. You don't want to, once you thaw it out, you want to make sure to use it, though. You don't want to continue to refreeze it after thawing it out.
Okay, and what are some ways that you can zest? Did you use lemon zest?
I did. So I used the lemon zest in our pesto over here, the kale pesto, and I did use some lime zest in the watermelon salad.
And what are some ways that you can get at the zest?
So I like to use a microplane. If you don't have a microplane, you could use a regular peeler and just get the, outer part of the peel, but you would have to chop it, make it small, because if you eat a peel this large, it could be a bit too much. You could get some of that bitterness. So you would have to really chop it pretty small. And, it's not impossible, but you could just get really small pieces in there. But really, I think that a microplane is a great investment in any kitchen, because you could get you could use your garlic here also if you wanted to microplane it. It's great for ginger because you don't have to peel the ginger. The blades kind of get that brown skin off and you don't have to peel the ginger. So it's a great tool. You could use it for Parmesan cheese also. If you don't have one, they're really not that expensive. So I would say that it's one of the really good tools that's going to help add a lot of flavor to your meals. So I have, yeah, thanks. So this is our kale pesto now. And so the consistency is a little bit different in this one. It's a bit more chunky. And the reason for that is because the kale itself, it's a tough vegetable, so it doesn't lose a lot of its texture the way something like basil or parsley would, just because they are some of the soft, finer herbs. So the kale, it still has some of that texture on here. And then it does have some great crunch because of the walnuts. So another great variation, if you do have any vegetable, any leafy green, just remember you can use the entire part, especially the stems. You can use the stems for all of these. If you didn't have Swiss chard, you could actually use beet tops. So the beet tops, you could store them the same way that the chard leaves could get stored. But you could actually use beet tops also and use that as a pesto. Combine it with some parsley. Parsley is a great companion for a lot of these recipes. So a lot of different options out there. Any other questions?
Yeah, what might be a good substitute if you don't have walnuts or if you're allergic to nuts?
So if you're allergic to nuts, I would just omit them. You don't necessarily have to put them in there. But if you just wanted a different kind of nut, you could use the pine nuts. You could use almonds. Almonds actually taste great with this. I've made one with the kale and then put some roasted red bell peppers in there and some pistachios. So any nut really is going to be good. Whatever you like. You can roast it. Make sure it's unsalted before you put it in, though, just because if it is salted, it's going to add more salt possibly to your dish. So you want to make sure that you're monitoring that aspect of it.
Okay. And how long would the watermelon rind keep? Do you have to keep that in the fridge?
Yes, so you definitely want to keep it in the fridge. And remember, this is just pickled. It's not necessarily canned. So it'll keep maybe up to a week in your refrigerator if it's tightly sealed. So we do have, a lid for this. And I will show you our lid. So it has an airtight seal for these. So keep it in the refrigerator for about a week. It's not going to be shelf stable though. But for the rind, if you wanted to add some garlic, some whole garlic in there also, that would be really great also.
Okay,
And
we have, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, that's fine, go ahead.
A question about growing herbs. Are there any herbs that are easier to grow, or is this a good time to grow herbs?
Yes, absolutely. So right now you can get your basil started. Usually basil's only good in the hot, weather. So get some basil in the ground. It's going to last you the entire summer. If you want to use a container also, our parsley still going to do really well. Parsley does good with the hot summer months also. What's not going to do well anymore, those are cilantro. Cilantro doesn't do well in warm weather, so that may not be something that we can continue to grow, but definitely your basil, the parsley is great. Some of the herbs that you can have year round are rosemary, oregano, and thyme. So if you have a container with those together, you could have them year round. They come back every year. So it's a really great way to just have, a small garden. Herbs are pretty expensive. And so, having a pot, if you buy a small pot, it could cost you a couple of dollars. If you wanted to start it from seed, that's also even more cost effective. So you could start all of those from seed and you're going to have a good harvest, especially, your thyme and rosemary, oregano. You'll have a good harvest for years to come. For other ones like your basil and the parsley, you could start growing them and those are a little bit more seasonal, but start now. Lettuces are going to be really great now too. Swiss chard is incredibly resilient. So you could start growing some now and you will have a harvest, I would say, through the summer. The same thing with kale. It gets a little bit hot, so you just have to do some pest control with, because it will get some aphids, but really you're going to have a great harvest if you start now. So get some kale also planted, some Swiss chard. You could have a small container. A 3-gallon container is all you need really for these plants.
Thanks. And then someone asked, do you need to use plant food or any specific kind of soil?
So you do want to use a fertilizer, definitely when you're planting it. And if you're going to use a container, you can get a bag of a container soil. That way it's made specially for that. If you're at home and maybe you have a larger area like a raised bed, then you could get a different type of like topsoil, get some compost in there. But either way, you do want to fertilize. And so making sure that you feed them first before you're putting any seedling or even any seed in the container.
Okay, and then we have one last comment. Someone said that sprouts and microgreens grown at home are a great way to supplement your produce, and that alfalfa, sunflower, and cilantro are easy to sprout and grow.
Yeah, definitely. So you can sprout all of those that you mentioned, even broccoli, and they do make some great additions. You just have to be careful with the seeds. You want to, anytime you're sprouting your own seeds, you want to make sure that it's from a company that has tested them for E. coli. A lot of times sprouts, you may hear that they have E. coli, but it's because it comes in the seed. So you want to make sure that they have been tested and that they do not have E. coli. Otherwise, it's perfectly safe. I wouldn't, use the seeds just from like your large store down the street, just because they're not necessarily made to be sprouted. So get some, definitely your microgreen seeds and the sprouting seeds from a reputable source. I actually have some in my refrigerator right now, and they're doing really well, but I just make sure that they've always been tested for E. coli.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. All right, well, it looks like we're out of time. I want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar. We really appreciate you being here. Remember, this webinar will be archived on our website at msdcenter.org. Also, if you want those CPEUs, you can go ahead and send an email to nourish@uth.tmc.edu. Thanks again for joining us today, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.